So this has literally zero connection to the topic I'm about to talk about, but while doing the setup, I noticed this piece of popcorn, which would date from back when the Oscars aired. Ugh. So today I'm going to talk about something that has been on my mind since the debut of Zack Snyder's Justice League, for reasons that I will reiterate in case people don't remember. But it really got me thinking about the topic of whether or not creators, IP holders, the people who produce and manage the entertainment that we watch, do they have a responsibility to address the behavior of their fans? And if so, to what degree? And what are the positives and negatives about trying to do that? And it's just something that's been rattling around in my head. So I mentioned Zack Snyder's Justice League. In case you don't remember, during a charity live stream, and I believe it was the day it premiered, or it was in the lead up, it was right around the time the thing dropped. Zack Snyder was on this live stream. It was a charity live stream to raise money to help combat suicide, which tragically Snyder's daughter took her own life during the production of Justice League. So obviously this is something that is not only very close to his heart, but is very regrettably kind of inextricably linked to the production of that film. So it made a lot of sense, and it was a wonderful cause. But one of the things that he did at the time, which was very surprising to a lot of people, was he actively distanced himself from the organization Geeks and Gamers, who was actually running the live stream. He was on their live stream, and he actively said that he is not directly linked to them, and he deliberately did not endorse them, and said, I forget his exact words, I might put up a clip.
On our donation page, we still have the Geeks and Gamers logo. I just want to say that I really, we talked about this, and we're really not affiliated with Geeks and Gamers as far as I'm concerned, and I really just want to make that clear. And I also want to just say, in light of recent events, I think we really, if Justice League teaches us anything, it's about coming together, and there's no room for hate. And I just think that it's important. It's an important message. And of course, as the father of Asian children, it really hits close to home for me. And I just really want to put that out there, that we all, there's no room for hate.
It was a pretty direct call out. Now, I'm going to try and not get into this too deep, because I don't really want this to be a finger wagging session at Geeks and Gamers. I don't do call outs. I try not to be a drama channel, but really quickly, Geeks and Gamers is a bit of a, let's go with divisive entity in geeky fandoms. They are anti-SJW types. Progressivism and diversity is ruining our entertainment style pundits. Geeks and Gamers have a fair amount of that style of content. And again, I don't know enough about them to make any specific accusations, but I'm saying that's the vibe of the organization. It just is. And what was really surprising about that was not only just sort of to be blunt about it, the balls of Zack Snyder to call them out on a live stream they were hosting, while some of them were right there. Their faces were on the screen. Aside from just whoa factor of that, it stands out because this kind of call out by a creator from people who like and vocally support his work for behavior that he feels is unacceptable is a rarity. It doesn't happen very often. Now, that just kind of got me thinking about it in general, because let's be honest, fans of anything are very passionate people. And passionate people have the capacity to generate a lot of love, a lot of affection, a lot of loyalty, a lot of anger. And depending on where they decide to direct that anger, they can be very destructive. And how that links to the specific media that they are fans of, that's not really something I'm prepared to parse right now. I will say, broadly speaking, that there are some properties, multimedia properties, that are just never going to call out this kind of behavior because their brand honestly kind of feeds that. And not to try and throw anybody under the bus, but something like Call of Duty, it would feel very bizarre for a violent, militaristic style game would call out its fans for their abrasive behavior. That would be weird. But something bit more within my sphere, something like Doctor Who, which does have toxic fan elements. Star Wars, which does have toxic fan elements. And understand, I'm not saying that people's beliefs make them toxic. I'm talking about behavior here. So when I say toxic, that actually has nothing to do with your particular views. People who, to use Doctor Who because it's my go-to, people who like the current era of Doctor Who and love Jodie Whittaker and think that Chris Chibnall is doing solid work are just as capable of toxic behavior as people who hate Jodie Whittaker and Chibnall. Now, that having been said, in my experience at least, the people who are already generating a lot of negative energy have a tendency to lean more in that, but any kind of fan can turn bad and can exhibit just horrible behavior. And this is something that happens across the board. There was a story not all that long ago about the actress who played Cho Chang in the fifth Harry Potter movie and the amount of racist vitriol thrown at her by supposed fans of Harry Potter. I say supposed. No, they probably were fans. But they cared more about what they thought that property should be than about the human being that they flung their venom at. And at the time, the producers behind that, and this is stuff we've only learned really recently, the producers basically told her, don't ever talk about the racism stuff. Don't bring it up. If asked, don't address it. They decided to pretend the problem wasn't there, which I think is a very common tactic, especially when you're dealing with something like a studio, because they care about their bottom line. It's something I come back to over and over and over again. And it's not in their financial interest to risk alienating or getting on the wrong side of a chunk of the most loyal fans, because while there can be some elements, people who just like to stir up crap, who come into a fandom, find something to get angry about and then just go at it, most of the people who get really passionate about this are fans, whether they get constructively passionate or destructively passionate. And it's going to be natural, as unfortunate as it is, for a studio to look at that and go, we really don't want to alienate anybody, because the simple truth is toxic fans' money spends just as good as positive fans. Which I suppose is part of why, while it was surprising that Zack Snyder said what he said, it's less surprising given that he's an individual, not a corporation. Warner Brothers wasn't ever going to say anything even close to that in regards to anybody. They never would. And let's be clear, Warner Brothers has benefited over the years by basically keeping its mouth shut about certain fan behavior. I mentioned Harry Potter already, and I don't know if people remember this now, because a lot of folks seem really vindicated by Zack Snyder finally getting to put out his version of Justice League. But I remember back when Batman v Superman came out, and a lot of people didn't like it, I'm sorry. I think it was garbage. But the wars, the flame wars that went on between Marvel fans and DC fans. And from the perspective I had, it felt like DC fans were starting more of the crap. But I say that as a Marvel fan who wasn't venturing really into DC fan spaces and was only seeing DC fans invade the fan spaces I was in. So I obviously have a skewed perspective on that. But that kind of nonsense was why IMDb got rid of its forums. Like, I remember hearing the news that IMDb shut down its entire forums section. And I remember at that point, I bowed out of them a while ago. I remember just thinking, oh, that's probably a good idea. Because it just got so insane. And I don't suspect Marvel vs. DC was the only thing that soured the forums, but it was certainly what I saw. Well, I say that, and I was seeing it, I was like, good grief. But at the end of the day, it was spats on internet forums. Is that something a company should be speaking out against? I don't know. I mean, that's part of the thing is I don't really have a firm answer to the questions that I posed at the start of this. And I think it's easier to boil it down to individual primary creators a bit more than talking about the corporations, because it's always going to be the interest of the corporations to basically take a step back and say nothing. Because again, even with things like, say, when Kelly Marie Tran was insanely massively harassed by a certain stripe of Star Wars fan in the wake of The Last Jedi, by and large, Disney and Lucasfilm left it to the individuals to stand up for her and didn't really do too much, which again, corporate angle makes sense, especially with the fans who are angry because they already hated people like Rian Johnson anyway. So he can decry this and placate the people who recognize it as horrible things that shouldn't be happening to anybody, but also isn't going to tick off anybody who wasn't already ticked off. This is the kind of calculus that goes on at the corporate level. It's insanely cynical. But bringing it down to individuals, or even bringing it down to something as small as YouTube. I mentioned earlier before talking about Geeks and Gamers, I really try and make a point of not doing call-outs or takedowns or causing internet drama. And part of the reason for that is I have twice now been on the receiving end of YouTubers with significantly larger followings than me doing videos that in some way derided me or were takedowns of things that I did. And in both cases, I saw their fans and their supporters descend on my channel and just be there to harass me and my subscribers and my commenters. And neither one of those people, to the best of my knowledge, ever made any kind of indication, hey, don't bother this person. I mean, I'm not trying to hold myself up as a pillar or a paragon, but I try really hard to remember when I talk about individuals on here that, don't do personal attacks. Not here, not in my comments, definitely where I have control over it, but not on Twitter. If you're angry about the work someone has done, that they've produced, if they made a piece of art that you don't like, and if you're upset because it is tied to a piece of media you care about and they made something you don't like, you can complain as loudly as you want about the piece of media. But the instant you start attacking individuals, that's not okay. And there were no kinds of guidelines like that given by these YouTubers. And of course, even if they'd done that, a lot of their fans wouldn't have listened, which I suppose is another reason that maybe a lot of times they don't speak out about this. Not YouTubers, not directors or producers or studios, because they know it's not going to stop the behavior anyways. That, to me, just makes it a coward's move. Well, we can't stop it, so we'll do nothing. Speaking as someone who's been on the receiving end of a lot of vitriol at several different points, and probably will be again, let's be honest. If you could do anything to trim down the volume of people coming and attacking me or whoever you've decided to highlight for your fans that they might go after, I certainly would have appreciated it. I'm not sure I would have necessarily thanked you for it, because they still would have descended on my channel regardless. But having been on the receiving end of people who did not do that, if it helps at all, it's worth doing. Assuming you care. That's kind of the other thing. They have to actually care. Although, I should be clear, it's not a risk-free proposition. And not just from the corporate element that I mentioned, the sort of let's not alienate fans. Handling it wrong can turn the entire thing worse. I think probably the best example of that is Ghostbusters 2016. This was a reboot that a lot of people were not happy about. I wasn't happy about on principle just because it's a reboot. And especially after seeing it, and honestly, the movie's fine. It's fine. But I was annoyed with it because there's absolutely nothing about it that required a continuity reset. There's nothing that needed to be a reboot. There was nothing going on with that story or characters or world or aesthetic that required them to go, okay, we're hitting the restart button. That thing before, that is no longer Ghostbusters. Now this is Ghostbusters. That rubbed me the wrong way. But there were also a lot of people who just got very, very, very angry because it was all women and were frankly sexist assholes about it. I'm not going to mince words. I don't really care about the feelings of people who went that road. However, in attempting to respond to that, some of the things that the cast and crew did with things like that somewhat infamous now shot of them all standing around with the sign that said girl power, it didn't feel like condemning fan behavior. It felt like poking the bear. And the way that some of them would speak, and I'm not sure this was actually the intention of any of the people involved in that film who spoke out against that, but it was interpreted this way. And it wasn't difficult to interpret some of it this way. It came across as anyone who is saying that this is a bad idea or we shouldn't be doing this, they're mad at us because it's all women. And speaking as someone who thought it was a terrible idea but had no issue with that, like, don't lump me in with the rest of them, please. So there is an argument to be made that attempt to call out behavior of an admittedly damaging and toxic sliver of fandom just made it feel like they were blaming a much larger chunk of fandom than was actually the problem and ended up alienating more people. Now, that's incredibly hard to prove in any meaningful way because I have no way of knowing what the box office or the support for the film might have been if they had not responded in that way. I can only speculate. But that certainly is the impression that I got left with. And if I, as a relative layperson, came away from that, I guarantee you that pretty much anybody involved in the industry came away with a similar, if not much more number and money lost backed version of that same conclusion. I think if I were going to try and come down somewhere on this, the closest thing I'm going to come to a hard line, because I think ultimately all this is incredibly situational. And like I said, I don't have answers. But I think it is very difficult for studios, directors, the face of YouTube channels, anybody, to try and regulate the behavior of fans toward other fans. Because that's just kind of stepping into something that only kind of involves you. Like, it involves your work, but is that really your place to step in because there's a fan war going on? I don't think it would hurt every now and then for somebody with like creative authority, as opposed to like a studio head because nobody cares what they think as far as public statements go. And they know that. That's why they don't say things. But for somebody with a creative stake and creative clout in the project to go, hey, I understand you all care, you're passionate, but folks, you need to take a breath and calm down a little because this is supposed to be fun for everyone involved. I don't think you can really go too wrong just having somebody say that now again if they need to. I do, however, feel increasingly that studios especially, but even directors, or the people who run these projects, manage these IPs, they do have a responsibility to their own employees. So when I look back at something like what happened with the fifth Harry Potter and what happened to Katie Leung, and the fact that Warner Brothers told her to basically suck it up and not talk about it, instead of protecting a child, a young teenager who they hired and then refused to help or assist or protect. No, that's not okay. These people work for you. You are making money off their back, off of their work. The least you could do is have their back and not just throw them to rabid fans to be torn apart in social media to the point that they have to quit various social media platforms, which happens frighteningly often. Now, I do feel a need to clarify. I'm a little bit more iffy if fans are coming at it's usually an actor, but somebody involved in a project for something that they did that has nothing to do with that project. That's probably not something you want to step in. But when you're basically dealing with people who are employed by you, brought into this world by you, who are being harassed simply by existing, and in many cases, just by existing as someone who isn't cis, male, white, and heterosexual. Don't leave them out to dry. And just whoever you are, if you're a YouTuber, if you have a notable Twitter following, if you are a director, if you run a studio, realize that what you put out in the world can and will drive people's actions. People will do things to other people based off things that you tell them. That doesn't mean you have control over them. They still are deciding to do these things on their own. But if you run a YouTube channel and you decide to do a takedown video of somebody, you are unleashing your fan base at them. Whether you appreciate that or not, it is what you're doing. And if you run a studio and you're casting a major franchise film that people care a lot about, anyone who you cast in a role is going to be in the crosshairs potentially of a lot of people. And if you're going to bring them into that situation, you owe it to them to try and protect them and try and wrangle those fans if you can. And again, the ability to do so is very limited. But I think how many people were pleasantly surprised by Zack Snyder calling out a sliver of fandom that he took issue with and he felt was not in the spirit of what he wanted his work to represent. Part of why that's notable is because of how rare it is. And maybe it shouldn't be that rare. I know it's scary. I know it is no easy thing. And I certainly, for one, hope I never have to do it. I don't ever want to have to distance myself from people who've supported me. But I'd like to think if it ever comes to it, I'll do it if I have to. Being in the public eye, producing consumption intended for the largest possible audience is not easy. It's draining. It's exhausting. And thinking about how many people your work is impacting if you have a substantial following or your work brings a particularly devoted fan base, that's an intimidating thing to think about. But you still need to think about it. Or at least maybe if you're large enough, hire somebody to think about it. That's what PR management's for. But yeah, I guess I'm going to wrap it up there. I feel like there is some degree of responsibility, but I can't draw a line on where that is and whose precise responsibility it is in specific situations. But when fans run rampant in the name of love for a property or personality, and the people behind that property or personality remain silent, it's a tacit endorsement. You're not saying they should stop. And you probably should. Those are my rambling thoughts on all this. What do you think about this topic in general? It's a difficult one to try and get fully on top of, and I'm certainly interested to hear what you have to say. Just do it politely. Whatever your thoughts are, drop them down in the comments and let's talk about it. I have a Patreon, and that is how I am able to do this. Without the support of my Patreon backers, I would not be able to cover my bills. This is, in fact, my entire living at this point. Any amount you're able to support is of great assistance, and there are rewards for every tier, from being able to see the docket early, to getting to vote on topics, to a Patreon-exclusive Discord, to getting your name in the credits, which you'll be seeing shortly. But even if you can't do that, like, share, subscribe, the bell, hey, if you're feeling ambitious, those all help me out as well. Keeps the algorithm from completely forgetting me. But I'm not going to tell you even have to do that. Because while I do feel a certain amount of responsibility, at the end of the day, you are the council, and I'm just running the meetings to the best of my ability. And until next time, this council is adjourned.